I used to think being kicked out of my childhood home while pregnant was the cruelest thing a father could do. I was wrong. The cruelest thing was the secret he hid in those harmless papers I signed. 7 years later, as he begged for a restructure, I sat in the shadows watching him sign his own death warrant. This time, I did not just buy his debt, I bought the lawyer he trusts the most. My name is Greer Whitethorn, and standing on the front porch of my childhood home in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, felt less like a homecoming and more like stepping onto a gallows. The wind was biting, a sharp -10 degrees that sliced right through the wool of my second-hand coat. I could feel the cold settling into my bones, but it was the heat radiating from my stomach that kept me grounded. I was 20 years old, I was 6 months pregnant, and I was about to ruin dinner. Snow clung to the hem of my coat, turning into dirty gray slush as I stomped my boots on the welcome mat. Inside, the house glowed with that deceptive amber warmth that rich people curate so well. It was the kind of light that made you think of family and safety. But I knew better. In the Whitethorn house, light was just another utility bill, and warmth was conditional. I did not knock. I still had my key, a heavy brass thing that felt foreign in my hand now. I turned it, the lock tumbling with a familiar heavy click, and pushed the door open. The sound of silverware scraping against china died instantly. The dining room was to the left, through an archway framed in dark oak. My father, Harlan Whitethorn, sat at the head of the table. He was a man built of sharp angles and expensive tailoring. His silver hair swept back with the precision of architectural drafting. Around him sat the usual court. There was my Uncle Vance, a man who smelled perpetually of bourbon and desperation, and 2 business associates whose names I could never remember, but whose hunger for my father's approval was etched into their faces. They all looked up. I stood in the archway, unbuttoning my coat just enough to let the reality of my situation show. My belly pushed against the fabric of my sweater, a round, undeniable fact in a room that preferred polite fictions. Harlan did not stand up. He did not drop his fork. He did not look at my face to see if I was crying, or if I was tired, or if I was scared. He looked straight at my midsection. His eyes narrowed, not with concern, but with the specific irritation of a man spotting a scratch on the fender of his new luxury sedan. It was a blemish, a defect in the product line. "Greer," he said. His voice was level, devoid of any inflection that might suggest we shared blood. "I was under the impression you had the good sense to stay away." "I have nowhere else to go," I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "I need help. Dad." The word Dad hung in the air like a bad smell. Uncle Vance cleared his throat and took a long, nervous sip of his wine. The 2 associates studied the tablecloth, as if the weave of the linen was the most fascinating thing on earth. Harlan picked up his napkin and dabbed the corner of his mouth. "Help," he repeated, tasting the word and finding it sour. "You come into my house, looking like that, and you ask for help. I am your daughter." "You are a liability," he cut in, sharp and fast. The room went dead silent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, marking off the seconds of my humiliation. "You are a liability to this name," Harlan continued, his voice rising just enough to carry the weight of a judge passing sentence. "I have built a reputation in this state. Ironhearth Civil Works stands for discipline, integrity, control. And you walk in here parading your lack of all 3. He gestured at me with his fork, a dismissal. "I do not care who the father is. I do not care what sob story you have rehearsed. You are done. Greer, you are out of this house. You are out of the will. I am cutting you off completely. Tonight." He looked at the men around the table, seeking their silent affirmation. A man cannot manage a company if he cannot manage his own household. Consider this management. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was exactly what I had expected. I did not cry. Tears were a currency that held no value with Harlan Whitethorn. If I cried, he would just see it as weakness. further proof that he was right to discard me. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me. It was colder than the wind outside. "Okay," I said. Harlan blinked, expecting a scene. He wanted me to scream so he could call the police. He wanted me to beg so he could enjoy the refusal. "Okay," he asked, suspicious. "I heard you," I said. "I am a liability. I am leaving." I walked forward. Uncle Vance flinched, as if he thought I might grab a steak knife. But I just walked to the empty chair at the other end of the table, the place that used to be mine. I did not sit. Instead, I reached under my coat and pulled out a small, flat box. It was a gift box, wrapped in tasteful silver paper, the kind you might put a scarf or a necklace in. I placed it gently on the table. Then, I slid it across the polished mahogany until it rested right on Harlan's placemat, next to his plate of half-eaten roast beef. "Since I'm leaving," I said, "I wanted to return some things that belong to you." Harlan stared at the box. "What is this?" "Open it." He hesitated, for a second. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes, the fear of a man who has too many closets and not enough locks. But his ego won out. He scoffed, reaching out with a hand that wore a gold signet ring and tore the paper. He flipped the lid open. There was no jewelry inside. There was just paper, a stack of envelopes, some opened, some still sealed with aggressive red stamps. I watched his face as he pulled the top one out. It was a final notice from a credit card company I had never applied to. The limit was $10,000. The balance was $10,400. He froze. "That is a default notice," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "For a credit line opened 3 years ago, I was 17. I could not legally sign for it." He shuffled to the next paper, a personal guarantee for a heavy equipment lease. "That one is interesting," I pointed out, pointing a shaking finger at the document in his hand. "It guarantees a lease for 3 bulldozers for Ironhearth Civil Works. The guarantor is Greer Whitethorn. But if you look at the signature, Dad, it looks remarkably like yours. Doesn't it? Just with a little loop at the end to make it look feminine." Uncle Vance made a choking sound. The business associates were suddenly very pale. This was not just family drama anymore. This was felony fraud. Harlan did not look at me. He stared at the papers, his face turning a shade of red that matched the wine in his glass. He was not panicked. That was the thing that chilled me the most. He was not looking at the papers with the horror of a man caught in a crime. He was looking at them with anger, pure, unadulterated rage that I had dared to put them on his dinner table. He slammed his hand down on the stack, covering the evidence. "How dare you?" he hissed. "I did not sign those." "Harlan," I said, dropping the title of Dad. "I checked my credit report yesterday because I wanted to rent an apartment for me and the baby. Do you know what my score is? It is 420. I cannot rent a parking spot, let alone a home, because you used my social security number to leverage your cash flow." "You ungrateful little brat," he spat, standing up. He loomed over the table, casting a long shadow. "I put clothes on your back. I put food in your mouth. You think you understand how this world works? You think money just appears. I did what was necessary to keep this roof over your head." "You committed identity theft," I said. "Against your own child." "I managed assets," he roared. "And you are an asset, or you were. Now you are just a mess." He grabbed the box and shoved it toward me, the papers scattering onto the floor like dead leaves. "Get out. Take your trash and get out of my sight, if you are not off this property in 5 minutes. I am calling the sheriff and telling him you are trespassing and harassing guests." He looked at his associates. "She is hysterical. Pregnancy hormones. She does not know what she is saying." The men nodded quickly, desperate to believe him because believing him was safer than acknowledging they were dining with a criminal. I looked at him one last time. I wanted to see some remorse. I wanted to see a father, but all I saw was a businessman calculating his losses. "Goodbye, Harlan," I said. I turned around. My heart was hammering against my ribs, hard enough that I thought it might bruise them. I walked back through the archway, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. I did not look back. I grabbed the doorknob and pulled the heavy front door open. Stepping out into the biting cold, the wind hit me instantly, drying the sweat on my forehead. It was freezing, but the air felt cleaner out here. I walked down the steps, careful not to slip on the ice. My old sedan was parked at the end of the long, winding driveway, looking like a rusted blemish against the pristine snowbanks. I reached the car and fumbled for my keys. My hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow, aching terror. I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I had a credit score that flagged me as a financial leper. I opened the car door and slid into the driver's seat. The vinyl was hard and freezing. I jammed the key into the ignition, but before I turned it, I paused. The garage door, which was detached from the main house but sat close to the driveway, was open a crack. Harlan used it as a smoking lounge in the winter because he did not allow smoke in the house. I heard voices. The acoustics of the winter night carried sound with terrifying clarity. It was Harlan's voice, and Uncle Vance's. They must have stepped out the side door for a cigarette immediately after I left the room. "You were hard on her." "Harlan," Vance's voice drifted over the snowbanks. He sounded drunk and jittery. "What if she goes to the bank? What if she talks?" I held my breath. My hand froze on the key. "She won't talk." Harlan's voice was dismissive, accompanied by the distinct click of a lighter. "She is 20 years old, pregnant, and broke. She is going to be too busy trying to find diapers and formula to look at a balance sheet. But the papers, Harlan, she had the copies." "Let her have them. Who is going to believe a homeless single mother over the CEO of Ironhearth?" Harlan laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. "Besides, this works out perfectly." "How does this work out?" Vance asked. "I needed her out of the house. Vance, I needed her address to be untraceable for the next audit cycle. If she stayed, the auditors might have sent verification letters to the house. Now," he exhaled smoke, "now she disappears. She is off the grid. By the time she figures out how to read a ledger, the statute of limitations will be halfway done, or I will have refinanced the debt to another shell. It is a gift. Vance, her getting knocked up is the best thing that could have happened to the company. At least the pregnant brat will be gone before she reads the statements properly." I sat there in the dark car. The cold was no longer on my skin. It was inside me. It was not just about shame. It was not about me embarrassing the family name with an illegitimate child. That was just the cover story. He had kicked me out because he needed me to be missing. He needed his victim to be homeless, so the bank notices would return to sender. He was banking on my poverty. He was betting on my struggle. He calculated that I would be so consumed by the misery of survival that I would never have the energy to fight him. He did not just steal my credit. He stole my future, and he was counting on my baby to be the anchor that drowned me. I looked at the house. The golden light still spilled from the windows, looking warm and inviting. As I watched, the porch light, the one that was supposed to guide family home, flickered once and turned off. He had extinguished me. I turned the key. The engine sputtered and coughed to life. I did not turn on my headlights until I was a mile down the road. I drove through the snow, the heater blowing cold air onto my numb fingers. My hand drifted down to my stomach. "He thinks you are a weakness," I whispered to the darkness of the car. "He thinks you are the reason I will fail." I passed a sign for the interstate. Minneapolis was north. I could disappear there. I could sink into the anonymity of the city. "He is wrong," I said. My voice sounded different now. The tremble was gone. "You are not a liability. You are my reason." I glanced at the passenger seat where I had thrown my bag. I had left the box of papers on his table, but I had kept the originals in a plastic folder tucked inside my sweater. I had not given him everything. Harlan Whitethorn thought he had just discarded a broken daughter. He did not realize he had just created his own worst creditor. I drove into the night, the snow swirling in my high beams like static, and for the first time in my life, I stopped wishing for a father and started planning for a target. The leasing office in Bloomington smelled like stale coffee and lemon floor cleaner. a scent that I would come to associate with the distinct flavor of rejection. I sat across from a woman named Brenda, who had the tired, kindly eyes of someone who had to deliver bad news for a living. On the particle board desk between us lay my entire life's worth of liquidity, $1,200 in cash, neatly stacked, and a letter from the manager of a 24-hour diner confirming that I, Greer Whitethorn, was employed and capable of clearing $300 a week in tips. It was enough. The rent for the one-bedroom apartment near the highway was $800 a month. I had the first month, I had the security deposit, and I had the income. In a cash economy, this was a done deal. But Bloomington was not a cash economy. It was a data economy. Brenda turned her computer monitor slightly so I could see the screen. She did not look at me. People rarely look at you when they are telling you that you do not statistically qualify to exist in their building. "I am sorry, Ms. Whitethorn," she said. The system auto-declined the application. "It is a hard stop." "I have the cash," I said, pushing the stack forward. My hand was trembling. "Just a little. I can pay you 3 months in advance if you give me a week to pick up extra shifts. Look, the money is right here." "It is not about the cash," Brenda said, finally meeting my eyes. "It is the credit check. Your FICO score is 420. We require 650 minimum. Corporate policy, 420. The number sounded like a joke. It was a number that belonged to a chronic gambler or someone who had just emerged from a decade in prison. Not a 20-year-old college dropout who had never owned a credit card. "There must be a mistake," I said, though I knew there was not. "Can you override it?" "I can't," she said, sliding my cash back toward me. "With a score that low, and the active delinquency flags, the system marks you as high risk. It flags you as a liability." There was that word again. Liability. It was following me like a stray dog. I walked out of the office with my cash in my pocket, feeling heavier than I had when I walked in. The humiliation was specific and biting. It was not just that I was being told no. It was that I was being told I was untrustworthy by an algorithm. I had the means to pay, but I lacked the reputation to be allowed to pay. I spent the next 2 weeks living in my sedan. There is a romanticized version of living in a car that you see in movies, where the character gazes out at a city skyline and eats a sandwich while thoughtful music plays. The reality is nothing like that. The reality is biological and terrifying. I parked in the back lot of a 24-hour superstore because the lights kept the crime away, but they also made it impossible to sleep. It was February in Minnesota. I had to run the engine for 10 minutes every hour to keep from freezing to death. But every time I turned the key, I watched the gas needle dip, and I calculated how many miles of heat I had left. The condensation was the worst part. My breath fogged up the windows, turning into ice on the inside of the glass. I woke up every morning with a stiff neck and a damp coat, feeling like I was covered in a film of grime that no amount of wet wipes could remove. I had to ration my phone battery like it was water. I turned it on only to check messages from the diner or to desperately search for no-credit check apartments, and then I turned it off immediately. On the 4th night, I broke. I was huddled in the back seat, trying to wrap a blanket around my legs, which were swollen from the pregnancy and the lack of movement. I was hungry, I was cold, and I was terrified. I turned on my phone and dialed the number I had sworn I would never call again. Harlan picked up on the second ring. "Hello?" "Dad?" I said. My voice cracked. I hated myself for it. "Dad, it's freezing. I am sleeping in a parking lot." There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of jazz music in the background. He was probably in his study, sitting in the leather chair, a glass of scotch in his hand. The contrast between his warmth and my cold made me nauseous. "Greer," he said. He did not sound worried. He sounded bored. "I assume this calls for money." "I have money," I said, my teeth chattering. "I have cash, but I can't rent a place. The credit score, the things you put in my name, nobody will take me." Harlan chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Welcome to the real world, Greer. Actions have consequences. You wanted to leave. You are learning what it costs to stand on your own 2 feet. You ruined my credit. I snapped, anger momentarily warming me. You used my name for your loans. That is fraud. Stop being hysterical, he said, his voice dropping into that patronizing tone he used when I was a child. You always were too emotional. This is why men handle finances. You see a number and you panic. I see a strategy. Those accounts are necessary for the family business. You are contributing to the legacy, whether you like it or not. I am homeless. Dad. Your grandson or granddaughter is sleeping in a car. You are suffering the consequences of your choices, he said coldly. If you were smart, you would find a husband to take care of you, or you would apologize and come home on my terms. But since you are so independent, you figure it out. Don't call me until you are ready to be a daughter again. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. He called me hysterical. He called my homelessness a choice. He framed his crime as my incompetence. I realized then that begging him would never work because he did not see me as a person in pain. He saw me as a rebellious asset that needed to be depreciated until it had zero value. I stopped crying. The tears froze on my cheeks. I wiped them away with the rough wool of my glove. The next day, I found a landlord. He was a man named Mr. Henderson who owned a dilapidated duplex in a neighborhood where the police sirens were background noise. He met me on the porch, cigarette hanging from his lip. He did not ask for a credit check. He did not ask for a job letter. $600 a month, he said, looking at my car, then at my stomach. Cash, first and last up front, no lease. You miss a payment. The locks change the same day. Understood? Understood, I said. I handed him the envelope of cash. I watched him count it, licking his thumb to separate the bills. I felt a deep, burning shame in my gut. I was buying the right to exist. I was bypassing the system that had rejected me, but in doing so, I was stepping out of the protected world of laws and rights and into the gray zone where I had no leverage. But I had a roof that night. Lying on a mattress I had dragged in from the curb and cleaned with bleach. I started my war. I had a warm room. I had an outlet for my phone. And I had rage. I went to the credit bureau website. I created a dispute account. I was going to flag every single one of those loans as fraudulent. I pulled up the report. I went through line by line. Iron Hearth Equipment Lease, Guarantor Greer Whitethorn, Status Default, Mid-State Revolving Credit, Guarantor Greer Whitethorn, Status 90 days past due. I clicked Dispute. I selected Not My Account. I typed in the explanation I never signed for this. I was a minor or a student when this was opened. This is identity theft. 2 days later, the notification came back. Dispute rejected. Creditor has provided proof of validity. I opened the attachment they sent. It was a PDF of a loan agreement from 2 years ago. I scrolled to the bottom. There was my signature. It was not a forgery. That was the horror of it. It was not a shaky imitation done by my father's secretary. It was my signature. The loop of the G was distinctive. The slant was mine. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. How I had never walked into a bank with him. I had never sat in a closing meeting. Then I remembered. It was a Tuesday during my sophomore year of college. I had come home for laundry. Harlan had been in the kitchen, shuffling papers. He had looked stressed, which was rare. He told me the company was updating its insurance policies for family members and that I needed to sign a few forms to keep my health coverage active. Just standard updates. Greer, he had said, sliding a tablet across the island counter. Sign here, and here, and here. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, so let's hurry. I had signed. I had signed on the digital pad. Trusting him, I had signed because he was my father and he paid the tuition, and I had no reason to think he was selling me down the river. I frantically logged into my old university email account. I searched for Dad and insurance. I found it, an email from his assistant, dated that same week. Subject copies of signed documents. I opened the attachment. Page 1, health insurance update. Page 2, beneficiary update. Page 4, unlimited personal guarantee. The document I had signed on the tablet had been inserted into a loan packet, The signature block on the digital pad had been applied to a document I never read. He had tricked me. He had used my trust and my haste to legally bind me to his debt. I sat back on the mattress, the laptop burning my thighs. It was evil, but it was brilliant. If I went to the police now, he would produce this email. He would say, "See, we sent her the copies. She had every opportunity to read what she signed. She is just trying to get out of it now that the bill is due." Legally, I was cooked. He had papered over his crime with my own hand. I looked around the empty, peeling room. I looked at the cash-only receipt, mister. Henderson had scribbled on a napkin. I realized something fundamental in that moment. The world did not care about truth. The world cared about documentation. Harlan won because he had the paper. I lost because I had the story. "No more," I whispered. I placed my hand on my stomach. The baby kicked, a small, fluttering movement that felt like a secret handshake. "No more crying," I said to the empty room. "No more calling him. No more begging people to believe I'm a good person." I closed the laptop. "I am going to learn this game," I said, my voice hardening into something that sounded less like a girl and more like the woman I was being forced to become. "I am going to learn how to make the paper say what I want it to say. I am going to learn every loophole, every clause, and every regulation that he used to trap me." I was done being a victim of the system. I was going to become a master of it. I looked down at my belly, shielding it with my hand as the wind rattled the thin windows of the duplex. Mommy is going to get her name back. I promised the life inside me. And we are not going to do it with tears. We are going to do it with ink. Finding a job when you are visibly pregnant and have a credit score that scares away landlords is not about building a career. It is about survival. I applied to 40 places in 3 days. I was rejected by 39 of them. The retail managers looked at my stomach and saw a liability. The restaurant saw a slow server. The only place that did not care about my physical state was Cinderline Recovery Services. Cinderline was a third-party debt collection agency located in a windowless business park on the edge of Bloomington. The interview lasted 10 minutes. The hiring manager, a man with sweat stains on his collar, asked if I could type 30 words a minute and if I had thick skin. I told him I had nothing else left. He hired me on the spot. The job was simple. I was a collector. My role was to sit in a gray cubicle, put on a headset that smelled like antiseptic wipes, and call people who did not want to be called. I had a list of names, a list of debts, and a script designed to extract payment arrangements. It was miserable work, but it was an education I could not have paid for at Harvard. My supervisor was a woman named Nora Calder. Nora was in her late 50s, with dyed red hair and a voice that sounded like it had been cured in smoke and whiskey. She was the top collector on the floor, a legend who could talk a single mother into paying a credit card bill before buying groceries. On my 3rd day, I was crying in the break room. I had just gotten off the phone with an elderly man who had sobbed for 20 minutes about his medical bills. Nora walked in, stirred her black coffee, and looked at me. "Dry it up, Whitethorn," she said. It was not unkind, just practical. "He has cancer." "Nora," I said, wiping my eyes. "He can't pay the $500. "Everybody has cancer, or a divorce, or a dead dog," Nora said, leaning against the vending machine. "Listen to me closely. We are not priests. We are not social workers. We are auditors of reality." She sat down across from me. "Greer, stop listening to the stories. The story is a distraction. The story is what they tell themselves to sleep at night. You need to look at 2 things, the cash flow and the signature. Did they sign the paper? Yes. Did they spend the money? Yes. Then they owe the debt. It is simple math. Emotions are just overhead costs." I stopped crying. I looked at her. "What if they were tricked?" I asked. Nora laughed. "Then they should have read the fine print. In this country, your signature is your bond. If you put your name on it, you own it. Now go back out there and collect." I went back to my desk. But I did not just read the script anymore. I started reading the files. I learned the anatomy of a debt. I learned about the acceleration clause, a terrifying paragraph buried in almost every loan agreement that states if you miss one payment, the lender has the right to demand the entire balance immediately. It was the nuclear option, and banks used it to force settlements. I learned about charge-offs, where a bank realizes a debt is unlikely to be paid, so they sell it to companies like Cinderline for pennies on the dollar. The bank gets a tax write-off to clean their books, and the agency gets the right to harass the debtor for the full amount. It was a machine. It was a cold, efficient, industrial machine designed to turn human error into corporate profit. And as I worked, I began to realize something that shifted my entire worldview. Most of the people on my list were not victims of bad luck. They were victims of their own habits. They lied to themselves. They bought things they could not afford to impress people they did not like. They ignored the mail because they were afraid to open it. Nora was right. Poverty was often a tragedy. But bankruptcy was usually a sequence of bad decisions and denials. But I was the exception. I was the anomaly in the data set. I had not spent the money. I had not made the choices. I was carrying the weight of a ghost. 3 months into the job, I saw a flyer at the community center for a seminar, Identity Theft and Your Legal Rights. I went. It was held in a drafty basement room with fluorescent lights that buzzed. There were only about 10 people there, mostly seniors who had been scammed by phone fishers. The speaker was a man named Glenn Northbrook. Glenn was not a knight in shining armor. He was not handsome in the way the boys at college had been. He was 30 years old, wore a suit that was slightly too large for his shoulders, and had the tired, patient demeanor of a high school math teacher. He was a forensic accountant who did pro bono work for legal aid clinics. He spoke about credit freezes, fraud alerts, and the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. He spoke about data like it was a physical landscape that could be mapped and navigated. After the seminar, I waited until everyone else had left. I approached him while he was packing up his laptop. "Mr. Northbrook," I said, "I have a question about familial fraud." He stopped packing and looked at me. He looked at my stomach. I was 8 months along now and then looked me in the eye. He did not pity me. He assessed me. "That is the hardest kind," he said. "The police hate it. DAs hate it. Nobody wants to arrest a dad for stealing his daughter's credit." "I don't want him arrested," I said. "Not yet. I want to know how to stop the bleeding." We went to a diner next door. I bought him coffee. He bought me a sandwich because he said I looked like I needed iron. I told him everything. I told him about the dinner, the papers, the trick with the digital signature pad, and the acceleration clauses that were currently destroying my life. Glenn listened without interrupting. He took notes in a small black notebook. When I finished, he tapped his pen on the table. "You are in a bad spot." "Greer," he said. It was the first honest thing a man had said to me in months. "He has the documentation. The digital signature is legally binding unless you can prove intent to defraud, which is almost impossible without a whistleblower. So I give up." "No," Glenn said. "You pivot. You are trying to fight a lion with a stick. You need to stop fighting and start building a cage." He tore a page out of his notebook and started sketching a diagram. "First, you dispute everything again, but this time, you do it by certified mail. Return receipt requested. You force them to create a paper trail of denial. Second, you stop engaging with him. Silence is your best weapon right now. If he thinks you are defeated, he will get sloppy. And third, you gather evidence." Glenn said, "You said you work in collections." "Yes." "Good. Use that. Learn how the debt moves. Learn how it is bundled. Your father is a businessman. He treats debt as a tool. If he used your name, it is because his own credit is maxed out, or he is hiding liabilities from his primary lenders. He is not just hurting you. He is likely committing bank fraud on a larger scale. Find the pattern." Glenn gave me his card. "I can't represent you in court. Greer, I am not a lawyer yet. I am just a forensic analyst, but I can help you read the map." I looked at the card. It felt like a lifeline. Why help me? Glenn looked at his coffee. Because I hate bullies. And because you are the first person I have met in this clinic who brought her own spreadsheets. I returned to Cinderline with a new focus. I was not just an employee anymore. I was a spy in the house of debt. I started paying attention to the letters that came to my own mailbox at the duplex. Every day, I received notices from collection agencies, demanding payment for the loans Harlan had taken out in my name. One night, I was sorting through a stack of final notice letters on my kitchen table. I had my highlighter out, marking the dates and amounts. I picked up a letter from a company called Vertex Asset Management. They were collecting on the heavy equipment lease for the bulldozers. I looked at the reference number in the top right corner, REFIHC-009-SEC-G. I frowned. In my job at Cinderline, we used random alphanumeric codes for accounts. But this code looked structured. IHCW, Iron Hearth Civil Works, SEC, Secured Secondary, G. Greer. My heart started thumping. I grabbed another letter, this one from a different agency, regarding a line of credit. REFIHCW-009-UNS-G. I ran to my car and grabbed the box of papers I had taken from the dinner table that night, the ones Harlan had thrown at me. I dug through them until I found a letter addressed to my Uncle Vance, which had gotten mixed in. It was a demand for payment on a loan Vance had guaranteed. REFIHCW-009-SEC-FI. I sat back in my chair, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. These were not random debts scattered across the financial universe. These agencies were using a client-provided internal coding system. The 009 likely referred to a specific project or fiscal year for Ironhearth. The suffix indicated the guarantor. This meant the debt collectors had received these files directly from a single source or a master list provided by the original creditor, who had grouped them by the corporate entity Ironhearth. Harlan had not just used my name randomly. He had bundled my liability with the company's corporate debt structure. He had institutionalized the fraud. To the banks, I was not a victim. I was a subsidiary. This was the link. This proved that my personal debt was actually corporate debt disguised as personal guarantees. If I could prove that the primary borrower was Ironhearth and that I had no equity or role in the company, the personal guarantee could be challenged as an invalid instrument used to bypass commercial lending caps. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. This was it. This was the loose thread. I grabbed my phone to call Glenn, but I stopped. Not yet. I needed more. I started a new system. I went out and bought a plastic file box and a scanner. Every letter that arrived, I scanned it. I saved the envelope. I took photos of the postmarks. I created a spreadsheet logging every call I received, every threat, every dollar amount. I was building a repository of my own destruction. At work, I started listening to how the managers talked about accounts with internal linkage. I learned that when a company restructures, they often try to cleanse the toxic debt by selling it off to friendly buyers or burying it in shell companies. I realized that Harlan would eventually try to do this. He would try to move the debt he had pinned on me to clean up his own balance sheet before a major audit or a sale. When that day came, he would need my signature again, or he would need me to be dead, or, at the very least, he would need me to be silent. I touched my stomach. The baby was heavy, dropping low, ready to arrive any day. "He thinks we are drowning," I whispered to the empty kitchen. I picked up the letter with the IHCW code and placed it carefully into a plastic sleeve. "But we are not drowning," I said. "We are taking inventory." I understood then that revenge was not about screaming at him in a restaurant. It was not about keying his car or telling my sad story to a judge who did not care. Revenge was preparation. Revenge was being the person who kept the receipt when everyone else threw it away. I turned off the kitchen light. The darkness did not scare me anymore. It was just a place to work. I was ready to wait. I was ready to let him think he had won. Right up until the moment I bought the paper that owned him. My marriage to Glenn Northbrook was not a fairy tale. We did not have a white wedding in a cathedral with doves and a string quartet. We got married at the courthouse on a Tuesday morning during his lunch break, 2 months after my daughter was born. I wore a gray dress I bought from a consignment shop, and he wore the same suit he wore to his fraud seminars. We did not marry for romance, though there was love there, a quiet, sturdy kind of love that felt like a foundation rather than a firework. We married because we were both people who believed in the power of a contract. We were allies. He needed someone who understood the granular misery of financial crime, and I needed someone who could look at a spreadsheet without flinching. We were two people who found safety in precision. Glenn was not a savior. He made that clear the night he proposed, sitting at my small kitchen table while I fed the baby. "I am not here to fix your life, Greer," he had said, pushing a lease agreement across the table for us to sign together. "I can't erase your dad. I can't erase the debt he put on you. But I can help you build a firewall so he never burns you again. If we do this, we do it as partners. Equal risk, equal disclosure." "Equal disclosure," I repeated. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. My daughter, Hazel, was born in a hospital where the nurses looked at my Medicaid card with exhausted indifference. When they placed her in my arms, she was tiny and furious, screaming at the lights. I looked at her scrunched-up face, her fists balled up ready to fight the world. And I made a promise. It wasn't a whisper. It was a vow etched into my bones. "You will never sign a paper you do not understand," I told her. "You will never owe a man for your existence, and you will never carry a name that is a liability." I did not name her Whitethorn. I gave her Glenn's last name, Northbrook. Not because I belonged to him, but because Whitethorn was a poisoned well. Life with Glenn was a series of audits. We did not argue about dirty dishes. We argued about strategy. One night, 6 months into our marriage, I was sitting on the floor of our living room. Surrounded by stacks of paper, I was working my way up at Cinderline. I had moved from the phones to the analysis department. I was no longer yelling at people for money. I was valuing portfolios of bad debt for the company to buy. Glenn walked in, looking tired. He dropped his briefcase and looked at the wall where I had taped up the timeline of Harlan's financial history. "You are obsessed," he said, loosening his tie. "I am diligent," I corrected him. "There is a difference. Greer, you have been staring at that iron hearth chart for 3 hours. You are going to burn out." I found a gap. "Glenn," I said, tapping a specific date on the wall. "Look, October 2019. He took out a bridge loan for $2 million. He used the Eden Prairie house as collateral. But here, in December, he refinanced the equipment lease, the one in my name, to cover the interest on the bridge loan." Glenn knelt beside me. So, he is robbing Peter to pay Paul," I said. "But Peter is me, and Paul is a shell company. He isn't making profit. He is churning debt. He is keeping the company alive by consuming the credit of everyone around him." Glenn sighed, rubbing his temples. "Greer, we know he's a fraud. Knowing how the engine works doesn't stop the car. It does if you know where the kill switch is," I snapped. "You are angry," Glenn said quietly. "Of course I'm angry. He sold me. Glenn, he sold his own daughter for cash flow." "I know," Glenn said, his voice steady. "But anger makes you sloppy. You are looking for a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets in forensic accounting. There is only weight. You have to gather enough paper to crush him, and right now, you are just throwing pebbles." He was right. I hated it. But he was right. I took a deep breath and looked at Hazel, who was sleeping in her playpen. "I need more weight," I said. "Then stop trying to be a detective and start being a broker," Glenn said. "You are good at Cinderline. Get better. Learn how to buy the debt, not just analyze it. If you want to hurt him, you have to own him, and you can't own him if you are broke." So I did. I threw myself into my work. I learned the dark art of distressed debt. I learned that $1 million debt could be bought for $50,000 if the bank thought it was uncollectible. I learned that the person who holds the paper holds the power. I started broking small deals on the side. I found a local dentist who was owed $10,000 by patients. I bought the debt for $500, collected $3,000, and kept the profit. It was small, unglamorous work, but every check I deposited was a brick in the fortress I was building around Hazel. Then came the call that changed the texture of the war. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the office, analyzing a bundle of defaulted car loans. When my cell phone buzzed, it was a number I did not recognize. "Hello. Greer?" The voice was whisper-thin, terrified. It took me a moment to place it. Aunt Marilyn. Marilyn was my mother's sister. She was a quiet woman who lived in the shadow of my family, always smiling, always nodding, never interfering. I hadn't spoken to her since the dinner. "I can't talk long," she said. "Harlan is at the club, but I heard you had a baby." "Her name is Hazel," I said, my voice cold. "She is a year old. You would know that if anyone in that house had a spine." I know, she stammered. "I am sorry. Greer, you have to understand. He controls everything." "He controls you because you let him," I said. "Why are you calling?" "Marilyn." "Because of the letters," she whispered. "I got a letter today, from a collection agency. It says I owe $40,000 for a landscaping consultation fee for Ironhearth." I closed my eyes. "Of course. You didn't sign for it, did you?" I asked. "No, I never signed anything, but they sent a copy of the contract. It has my signature. Greer, it looks exactly like my signature." "He traced it," I said. "Or he used a digital pad and lifted it. He did the same thing to me. I am scared. Greer, if Vance finds out, if Harlan finds out, I know." "Stop," I said. "Listen to me. Do not tell Harlan. Do not tell Vance. If you confront him, he will gaslight you. He will tell you it is a mistake, or that he is handling it, and then he will hide the paper trail." "What do I do?" "You send it to me," I said. "I need the letter. I need the contract. And Marilyn, I need you to go into the home office." "I can't go in there. He locks it. You have a spare key. I know you do. Grandma gave it to you years ago." Silence. Then, a shaky breath. "Yes. I need you to find the family file," I said. "He keeps a file of everyone's personal documents, birth certificates, social security cards, but he also keeps the authorization forms, the ones he claims we signed. I need copies. I don't need the originals if you take those. He will know. Just photos. High resolution. Can you do that?" "Greer, this is spying." "No, Aunt Marilyn," I said. "This is an audit. You are not the only one. He did it to me. He probably did it to Vance. He is using the whole family tree as his personal ATM. Do you want to lose your house? Because that is what happens next. He defaults, and the bank takes your living room." She was crying now. "I will try. Tonight, when he goes to the investors' dinner. Send them to my encrypted email," I said. "And then delete the sent message. Wipe the phone." When the files arrived that night, Glenn and I sat at the computer in silence. It was worse than I thought. There were dozens of them. Uncle Vance, Aunt Marilyn, even a cousin who was away at college. Harlan had systematically used our identities to guarantee lines of credit, equipment leases, and vendor contracts. He was running a Ponzi scheme of credit, using fresh family members to pay off old debts. "He is a monster," I whispered. "He is a desperate man," Glenn said, his eyes scanning the documents. "Look at the dates. The frequency is increasing. He used to do this once a year. Now it is every quarter. The company is failing. Greer, Ironhearth is bleeding out, and he is patching the wounds with your family's skin." "I have to go there," I said, standing up. "I have to confront him. I have the proof now." Glenn spun his chair around and grabbed my hand. His grip was hard. "No." "What do you mean?" "No, I have him." "You have pictures of paper," Glenn said sternly. "You don't have the originals, and these documents, they are messy. If you walk in there now and scream at him, do you know what he will do? He will deny it." He will do worse, Glenn said. He will destroy you. He has money. Greer, even if he is broke, he has access to lawyers who are better than us. He will claim you are a disgruntled daughter trying to blackmail him. He will claim you forged these documents to hurt him because he cut you out of the will. He will drag your name through the mud so deep that no bank will ever hire you again. He will paint you as unstable. He will question your fitness as a mother. The room went cold. He wouldn't go after Hazel. He went after you when you were pregnant, Glenn said. He has no floor, Greer. There is no bottom to what he will do to protect his image. If you strike at the king, you must kill him. And right now, you are holding a plastic knife. I sat back down. The rage was boiling in my chest, hot and acidic. I wanted to drive to Eden Prairie and burn the house down. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered, but I looked at Hazel, sleeping in the next room. I looked at the life I was building. Glenn was right. An accusation was just noise. I needed a judgment. I needed leverage that was enforceable by a sheriff. So what do we do? I asked. We wait, Glenn said. We let him think he is safe. We let him keep borrowing. We let him dig the hole so deep that he can't climb out. And the family? We protect Marilyn quietly. We help her dispute the debt without tipping him off. But for Harlan, we let him run. I want to hurt him, Glenn, I admitted. I don't just want the money back. I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to stand in a room and realize he has zero value. Then you have to stop thinking like a victim, Glenn said. Victims want an apology. Creditors want an asset. He pointed to the screen. You said you want to be a broker, then broker this. Don't just analyze his debt. Figure out who holds it. Figure out which banks are tired of dealing with him. Figure out who wants to sell. I looked at the list of creditors. There were 3 local community banks and 2 equipment leasing firms. I can't buy this debt, I said. It is millions of dollars. Not yet, Glenn said. But in a few years, if you keep working, if we save every dime, and if Ironhearth keeps sinking, the value of that debt will drop. Junk debt sells for pennies. When it gets cheap enough, we buy it. I looked at the screen. I saw the path. It was long. It would take years. It would require a level of discipline that would make me boring and hard and cold. Okay, I said. We play the long game. I spent the next 3 years becoming a ghost in his machine. I monitored his lawsuits. I tracked his UCC filings. I watched from a distance as he fired people and hired cheaper ones. I did not go to Christmas parties. I did not send birthday cards. I became a rumor in the family, the black sheep who lived in a small apartment and married a nobody. But every night, after Hazel went to sleep, I opened the ledger. I updated the numbers. I calculated the interest. One evening, Glenn found me staring at the screen, a small smile on my face. What is it? He asked. I was just thinking about titles, I said. He called me a liability. He thinks that defines me. I typed a new header into my spreadsheet, projected acquisition target Ironhearth. He turned me into a debt, I said, turning to Glenn. So I am going to learn how to become the creditor, and when I own the note, Glenn, I am going to call it in. I looked at my hands. They were not the hands of a scared girl anymore. They were the hands of a woman who knew the price of everything. I will get my name back, I said. Not by asking him to give it to me, but by buying the piece of paper where he signed it away. 7 years is a lifetime in the world of finance. In 7 years, a market can crash, recover, and bubble over again. In 7 years, a startup can become a monopoly, and a giant can become a liquidation sale. And in 7 years, a homeless 20-year-old girl sleeping in a sedan can become the most terrifying thing in a boardroom, a woman who knows exactly what everything costs. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass of my office on the 34th floor of a tower in downtown Chicago. The city was a grid of lights below me, a sprawling circuit board of commerce and debt. My reflection in the glass was sharp. The second-hand coat was gone, replaced by a tailored black blazer that cost more than the car I used to live in. My hair was cut short, precise, a style that said, I did not have time to fuss with it. I was 27 years old. I was the founder and principal of the Whitethorn Ledger Group. To the outside world, we were a boutique investment firm. To the insiders, we were vultures. But I preferred the term sanitation engineers. We cleaned up the messes that banks were too embarrassed to keep on their books. My business model was simple. Banks are required by law to maintain certain capital ratios. When a loan stops paying when it becomes a non-performing asset, it sits on their balance sheet like a radioactive weight. It ties up their capital. It looks bad to shareholders. It invites scrutiny from regulators. Eventually, the bank just wants it gone. They want to sell the debt for pennies on the dollar just to clear the ledger and move on. That was where I came in. I bought the debt. I bought the right to collect. And unlike the banks, I did not have a public image to protect. I had patience, and I had a very specific spreadsheet. I walked back to my desk. It was a slab of marble, clean except for a laptop and a single file. On the screen, my master tracking list was open. It was a catalog of misery companies that were over-leveraged, bleeding cash, and run by men who thought they could bluff the economy. But there was only one name that mattered. It was highlighted in soft yellow, Iron Hearth Civil Works. I sat down and tapped the Enter key. The file expanded. For 7 years. I had watched my father from the dark. I had not spoken to him. I had not sent a Christmas card. But I knew more about his daily life than his own wife did. I knew that in 2022, he had lost the municipal paving contract for Hennepin County. I knew that in 2024, he had leveraged the company's entire fleet of excavators to pay for a lawsuit settlement regarding a workplace injury he had tried to cover up. And I knew that right now. Iron Hearth was technically insolvent. The company was drowning. Harlan was keeping it afloat by rotating credit lines between 3 small community banks in the Midwest. It was a classic shell game. He would borrow from Bank A to pay the interest on Bank B, then borrow from Bank C to pay off the principal on Bank A. It worked as long as the banks remained isolated, as long as nobody looked at the whole picture, but I was looking at the whole picture. I picked up my phone and dialed an extension. Elliot, I said, is the conference room ready? They are waiting for you. Greer, Elliot Price's voice came through, crisp and British. And they look nervous. Elliot was my sword. He was a corporate attorney who had spent 10 years defending pharmaceutical companies before he decided he hated defending liars and preferred prosecuting them. He was expensive. He was ruthless. And he was the only person besides Glenn who knew the full scope of my plan. I walked into the conference room. 2 men in gray suits were sitting at the long table, clutching leather portfolios. They were from North Star Community Bank, one of the 3 lenders keeping my father's house of cards standing. They stood up when I entered. They expected a man. They always expected a man. When they saw me young, female, and utterly unsmiling, they faltered. Gentlemen, I said, gesturing for them to sit. I have reviewed the portfolio you sent over. You are looking to offload a bundle of distressed commercial loans. Face value is $4 million. That is correct. Ms. Whitethorn, the older banker said. He was sweating slightly. These are slow pay accounts, but the underlying assets are solid. Real estate, heavy machinery. The underlying assets are rusted metal and depreciating land, I corrected him, sliding a folder across the table. I have done my own diligence. The construction firm in this bundle, Iron Hearth. Their equipment is 10 years old. Their maintenance logs are falsified. If you foreclose on those bulldozers, you will get scrap metal value, not book value. The banker stiffened. Iron Hearth is a legacy client. Harlan Whitethorn is a pillar of the community. Harlan Whitethorn is 90 days past due on his interest payments, I said. And I know he just applied for a forbearance extension. You are terrified that if you push him, he will declare bankruptcy, and you will get zero. You want to sell this debt because you know it is toxic. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. What is your offer? The younger banker asked quietly. 30 cents on the dollar, I said. The older banker choked. 30. That is robbery. The standard rate for secured commercial debt is at least 60. For secured debt, yes, I said. But this isn't secured. Is it? Not really. I checked the UCC filings. The first lien on his equipment is held by a leasing company in Delaware. You are in second position. If he goes under, you are standing in line behind the guys who own the tractors. You have unsecured paper. I leaned forward. I am offering you cash. Today. You take the loss. You get the tax write-off. And you get this ugliness off your quarterly report before the federal examiners come in next month. Or you can keep hoping that a man who has not made a profit in 5 years suddenly discovers a gold mine in his backyard. They looked at each other. The fear was palpable. Bankers are herd animals. They are terrified of being the last one holding the bag. We need 45, the older man tried. 32, I countered, and I pay the legal transfer fees. 40? 35, I said. Take it or I walk, and you can explain to your board why you are holding $1 million of bad debt from a man who is currently borrowing from your competitors to pay you. The older banker sighed, a long, deflating sound. He opened his portfolio and uncapped his pen. We will need the funds wired by close of business Friday. You will have them by noon today, I said. As they were packing up, the younger banker lingered for a moment while his boss walked out. He looked at me with a strange expression, half respect, half warning. You know, he said, lowering his voice, we tried to call the note on Whitethorn last year. We were ready to seize the accounts. Why didn't you? I asked, keeping my face neutral. We got a call, he said, from someone influential, suggested that we give Harlan some breathing room, said it would be politically unwise to bankrupt a job creator in an election year. I froze. Who called? He shook his head. I don't know the name. It came down from the VP level. Just a heads up. Harlan usually has someone calling ahead to soften the file. You might find that buying the debt is the easy part. Collecting it. That is where the walls come up. I like walls, I said. I like tearing them down. He nodded and left. I stood there for a moment, processing the information. So Harlan had protection. That explained how he had survived this long. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a connected fraud. He had bought favor with someone powerful, maybe a local politician, maybe a judge, maybe someone in the regulatory body. It didn't matter. Corruption was just another form of leverage. If someone was protecting him, it meant he had something on them, or they had something on him. That was a pressure point I could exploit. I walked out of the conference room and into Elliot's office. He was sitting behind his desk, reviewing the purchase agreement. We got the North Star bundle, he asked. We got it, I said. 35 cents. But we need to structure the buy carefully. Elliot, Harlan cannot know I am the buyer. If he sees the name Whitethorn Ledger, he will run. He will hide assets. He will burn the records. Way ahead of you, Elliot said. Spinning his monitor around, he showed me a diagram of corporate entities. I have set up a special purpose vehicle, Elliot explained. It is a Delaware LLC called Aurora Distressed Assets. It is owned by a holding company in Nevada, which is managed by a blind trust. I am the trustee. Your name appears nowhere on the public record. As far as Harlan knows, his debt was sold to a faceless hedge fund in New York looking for tax losses. Aurora, I said, testing the name. I like it. It implies a new day. Or a cold storm, Elliot noted. Now, what about the other 2 banks? I asked. North Star is only 30% of his exposure. I have meetings set up with them for Thursday and Friday, Elliot said. The narrative is consistent. We are an aggressive fund sweeping up regional bad debt. We are making bulk offers. If they talk to each other, and they will just think the market is turning against the construction sector. I walked to the window again. The sun was rising over Lake Michigan, casting a cold, hard light on the city. I thought about the timeline. I had spent 7 years climbing out of the hole he dug for me. I had fixed my credit score point by painful point. I had saved every bonus, every commission, every windfall. Glenn and I still lived in a modest townhouse. We drove used cars. We wore generic clothes on the weekends. We had funneled every spare dollar into this war chest. And now, I was deploying it. Elliot, I said, turning back to him, when we close on all 3 bundles, what is the total position? Elliot tapped a few keys on his calculator. Principal amount is $3,200,000, he said. Accrued interest and penalties bring it to nearly $4 million. We are acquiring it for roughly $1.2 million in cash. $4 million. It was not a fortune to a company like Google or Apple. But to a man like Harlan Whitethorn, who lived on the edge of liquidity, who leased his cars and mortgaged his house and borrowed against his own ego, $4 million was an extinction event. Do we have the confession of judgment clauses in the transfer packets? I asked. Most of the original notes have them, Elliot said. But they are old. Some states have updated their laws on cognate notes. To be safe, we need him to sign a new one, a fresh acknowledgement of debt to the new creditor. He won't sign a confession, I said. He is arrogant, not stupid. He will if he thinks it is the only way to get a lifeline, Elliot said. That is the next phase, once we own the debt. We don't sue immediately. We invite him in. We offer him a restructuring deal. We play the part of the benevolent investor who wants to help him turn it around. We offer him fresh cash flow in exchange for updating the paperwork. The bait, I said. Exactly. We dangle the carrot of survival. And hidden inside the carrot is the hook. I nodded. It was ruthless. It was exactly what he had done to me with the insurance forms. He had used my trust and my need for safety to trap me. I was going to use his greed and his need for validation to trap him. Do it, I said. Buy it all. I want every dime of debt that man has. I want to own the chair he sits in and the desk he sleeps at. I went back to my office and sat down. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a small, framed photo. It was a picture of me and Hazel, taken on her first birthday, in the photo. I looked tired, my eyes dark with exhaustion, but I was holding her tight. I remembered that day. I had $12 in my checking account. I had bought her a cupcake from the grocery store, and we had eaten it in the park because I couldn't afford a party place. I looked at the spreadsheet again. The wire transfer confirmation popped up on the screen. Status sent, amount $385,000. Recipient, North Star Community Bank. Settlement fund. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was the heavy, solid feeling of a weapon being loaded. You called me a liability, Dad, I whispered to the empty room. I highlighted the North Star row on my spreadsheet and changed the color from yellow to green. But you forgot the most basic rule of accounting, I said, watching the cursor blink. Liabilities can be sold, and now I am the owner. I picked up my pen and wrote the date in my notebook. Today was the day the balance of power shifted. Today was the day I stopped running from the ghost of Harlan Whitethorn and started hunting him. I pressed the intercom button. Elliot, I said, get the paperwork ready for the other 2 banks and start drafting the invitation letter for Ironhearth. I want to meet him, but not yet. Let him sweat for a few weeks. Let him wonder why the collection calls from the banks have suddenly stopped. Understood, Elliot replied. The silence will terrify him more than the noise. Exactly, I said. I turned my chair to face the city. Below me, thousands of people were rushing to work, worrying about their bills, worrying about their credit scores. I knew their fear. I had lived in their fear, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the capital. I had the law. And for the first time in 7 years, I had the signature that mattered. The waiting was always the loudest part of the hunt. We had rented a conference suite on the 42nd floor of the Aon Center, a neutral ground that smelled of lemon polish and corporate sterility. It was not my office. I did not want Harlan Whitethorn to know where I really operated. I wanted him to believe he was meeting with a representative of Aurora Distressed Assets, a faceless capital fund that viewed his life's work as nothing more than a row on a spreadsheet. I sat in the adjoining media room, a small dark space separated from the main conference area by a wall that was thinner than it looked. On the desk in front of me, a high-definition monitor glowed with the feed from the conference room next door. "The camera angle is good," Glenn said quietly. He was standing behind me, his hand resting on the back of my chair. His touch was light, a reminder that I was not alone in the dark. "Is the audio syncing?" I asked, my eyes fixed on the empty leather chairs on the screen. "Perfectly," Glenn confirmed, "and the legal disclaimer is posted right on the door. This premise is subject to video and audio monitoring for security and quality assurance." He walked right past it. "He never reads the signs," I said. "He assumes the rules don't apply to him." In the main room, Elliot Price was setting the stage. He placed a laptop at the head of the table. Facing the empty chairs, the laptop was open, the camera active. We had told Harlan's secretary that the primary investors were based in Singapore and would be observing the meeting remotely due to the time difference. It was a lie, but it was a calculated one. It gave us a reason to record every word he said without him questioning why a red light was blinking. At 2:00 exactly, the heavy oak door opened. Elliot stood up, buttoning his jacket with practiced British civility. "Mr. Whitethorn, thank you for coming." Harlan Whitethorn walked in. I had not seen him in the flesh for 7 years. The screen did not hide the changes. He was thinner, his skin looser around the jaw, but he still moved with that aggressive, chest-forward stride of a man who owned the sidewalk. He wore a navy suit that I recognized it was bespoke, Italian wool, likely costing $3,000. He was wearing $3,000 while his company could not pay its interest. "Mr. Price," Harlan said. His voice came through the speakers crisp and clear. It sounded older, scratchier, like gravel grinding together. "Good to finally put a face to the emails." He reached out and shook Elliot's hand. It was the handshake of a construction boss too hard, a dominance display meant to crush the other man's knuckles. "Please, have a seat," Elliot said, gesturing to the table. "My partners in Singapore are logged in. They are just observing today." Harlan nodded at the laptop camera, flashing a winning, practiced smile. "Gentlemen, a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time." He adjusted his tie, looking confident. He looked like a man who had come to negotiate a victory, not surrender a corpse. And then, the second man walked in. I stopped breathing. The air in the small media room seemed to vanish instantly. I had expected Harlan to bring a lawyer. I had expected him to bring his accountant, a nervous man named Fred who had been cooking the books since the 90s. I did not expect him. The man was tall, with sandy blonde hair that was now styled in a slick, corporate cut. He wore a suit that was a cheaper copy of Harlan's. He carried a leather folio under his arm, mimicking Harlan's posture, Harlan's walk, Harlan's arrogance. It was Miles Harrow. My hands clenched into fists on the desk, so hard that my fingernails dug into my palms. Miles, the boy who had told me he loved me when we were 19, the boy who, when I told him I was pregnant, had turned pale and said he wasn't ready for that kind of life. The boy who had stopped answering my calls 3 days before Harlan kicked me out. "This is my chief operating officer," Harlan said, clapping a hand on Miles's shoulder. "Miles Harrow. He has been my right hand for the last 6 years. He knows the operations of Ironhearth better than anyone." "Miles," Elliot said, keeping his face perfectly neutral, though I knew he could feel the tension radiating through the wall. "Please, sit." Miles sat down. He looked older, softer. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the furniture, the view. He looked like a man who had won the lottery. "COO," I whispered. The word tasted like bile. Harlan had not just exiled me. He had replaced me. He had taken the father of my child, the man who had abandoned us, and groomed him to be the son he always wanted. Miles was sitting in my chair. Miles was living the life that was supposed to be mine, paid for by the debt that had been forced onto my name. "Greer," Glenn said. His voice was sharp. cutting through the red haze in my brain. Breathe. He hired him, I said, my voice shaking. He knew. Harlan knew Miles was the father. He knew Miles ran away, and he hired him anyway. He likes weakness, Glenn said. He hired Miles because Miles is controllable. Miles is a yes man. Look at him. He is terrified of Harlan. I looked at the screen. Glenn was right. Miles wasn't sitting comfortably. He was perched on the edge of his chair, watching Harlan for cues, laughing too quickly when Harlan made a joke. He was a pet. Focus, I told myself. Focus on the kill. I forced my hands to uncurl. I forced my breathing to slow down. I was not Greer, the abandoned girlfriend, anymore. I was the chairman of the board, and they were just assets to be liquidated. Let us begin, Elliot said on the screen. Mr. Whitethorn, Aurora Distressed Assets has acquired 100% of your outstanding commercial debt from North Star, First Federal, and Hennepin Leasing. The total principal and accrued interest stands at $4.2 million. Harlan waved his hand dismissively. A number on a page. Mr. Price, we are in a capital-intensive cycle. Construction is a cash flow business. We have receivables coming in next quarter that will cover that twice over. Your receivables are currently pledged to another lender, Elliot pointed out. Looking at a file. We ran a lean search. You have factored your invoices. Harlan's smile didn't falter, but his eyes got colder. Bridge financing, standard industry practice. Look, let's cut to the chase. You bought this debt because you want a return. You don't want to foreclose on a bunch of used excavators. You want cash. We want security, Elliot said. We are willing to restructure the debt. We can lower the interest rate, extend the maturity date by 24 months, and give you some breathing room. Harlan leaned back, interlacing his fingers behind his head. He looked triumphant. He thought he had won. He thought we were just another bank afraid to pull the trigger. Now you are talking sense, Harlan said. I can work with that. What are the terms? We need to understand the current cash position, Elliot said. My partners in Singapore need to know why the liquidity dried up. Where did the capital from the original loans go? This was the trap. We needed him to admit to the diversion of funds. Harlan glanced at Miles. Miles nodded, opening his folio. We had some unexpected overhead, Miles said. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. Regulatory compliance costs, environmental studies. The money was used for operational expenses. Operational expenses? Elliot asked. $4 million in overhead, for a company with no active major contracts. Harlan leaned forward, dropping the relaxed act. He lowered his voice, speaking to Elliot like they were co-conspirators. Look, Elliot, can I call you Elliot? You know how this works. We had to move some capital to cover a few legacy issues. We have a holding company, Whitethorn Holdings. We moved the loan proceeds there to protect them from frivolous litigation. It is just asset protection. The money is safe. It is just in a different bucket. I hit the spacebar on my laptop, marking the timestamp. He had just admitted to commingling funds. He had admitted to moving loan proceeds, which were secured by specific covenants, into a holding company to hide them from creditors. That was civil fraud. Depending on the intent, it was wire fraud. So, Elliot said, playing the naive auditor, you are saying the money was not lost. It was just transferred to pay off other debts. Exactly, Harlan said. We rob Peter to pay Paul. Everyone does it. It is how you keep the lights on until the big check clears. I have been doing this for 30 years. I move the debt around. I keep the banks happy. And eventually, the project hits and everyone gets paid. And the personal guarantees? Elliot asked. We noticed a lot of family names on the previous loans. Harlan laughed. It was a sound that made my skin crawl. Paperwork. Just paperwork. Banks love signatures. I gave them signatures. It keeps the underwriters happy. But the debt is mine. I manage it. I always control the landing. He was admitting it. He was admitting that the signatures of his family members were just tools he used to manipulate the underwriters. "And you, Mr. Harrow?" Elliot asked, turning to Miles. "You are aware of these transfers?" Miles puffed out his chest. "I execute the transfers. Mr. Price, Harlan sets the strategy. I handle the logistics. We run a tight ship." I looked at Glenn. He just implicated himself. Miles just confessed to being the accomplice. "They are arrogant," Glenn said. "They think they are talking to a hedge fund that only cares about the bottom line. They think moral hazard doesn't apply here." Elliot nodded slowly on the screen. "I see. Well, Mr. Whitethorn, my partners are willing to proceed. We believe in your ability to manage the landing." Harlan grinned. "Smart men. I knew we could do business." "However," Elliot said, sliding a thick document across the table, "because of the complexity of your current structure and the commingling you just described, we require a new security instrument, a consolidation of the debt into a single note." Harlan picked up the document. "Standard refinance agreement, with a confession of judgment attached." Elliot said clearly. The room went silent. Even Harlan knew what that was. It was the nuclear weapon of contract law. By signing it, the debtor voluntarily waives their right to a trial if they miss a payment even by $1. Even for one day, the creditor can take the judgment to the court clerk and seize assets immediately, without a hearing, without a judge, without notice. Harlan frowned. "A confession that is steep. Elliot, that is putting a gun to my head." "It is the only way my partners will authorize the extension," Elliot said. "You said yourself, you control the landing. If you pay on time, the gun is never loaded. This is just insurance. Unless you don't think you can pay." Harlan looked at the document. He looked at Miles. "We can pay," Miles said quickly. "The new Eden Prairie Mall contract is coming through next month. We will have the cash." Harlan hesitated. He was a gambler. But this was a bet with infinite downside. "I don't like it," Harlan said. "Then we call the loans today," Elliot said, closing his laptop. "We file for immediate repayment of the $4.2 million. Since you admitted the funds were moved to a holding company, we will also file for a forensic audit of Whitethorn Holdings to pierce the corporate veil." Harlan paled. He knew what an audit would find. It wouldn't just find the missing money. It would find the fraud. It would find the fake signatures. It would find the rot at the core of his life. He had no choice. He was cornered by his own lies. "Fine," Harlan snapped. "Give me the pen." He flipped to the back of the document. He didn't read the clauses. He didn't read the definition of default. He just wanted the problem to go away for another month. He signed his name with a flourish. Harlan J. Whitethorn. "Witness," Elliot said, sliding the paper to Miles. Miles signed below him. Miles Harrow, COO. I watched the pen move across the paper. It was hypnotic. With those two signatures, they had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. They had waived their right to defend themselves. They had waived their right to notice. "Done," Harlan said, tossing the pen onto the table. "Now, about the wire transfer for the operating capital. It will be processed within 48 hours, Elliot said. "Provided all collateral inspections clear." "They will clear," Harlan said. Standing up, "My equipment is top of the line." He buttoned his jacket. "Pleasure doing business. Elliot, tell your Singapore friends they made a wise bet." "I will tell them," Elliot said. Harlan and Miles walked out. The door clicked shut behind them. I sat in the dark room, staring at the empty chairs on the screen. My heart was beating in a slow, heavy rhythm. I felt Glenn's hand squeeze my shoulder. "You got them," Glenn said. "You have the confession. You have the tape." I stood up. My legs felt steady. The nausea of seeing Miles was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. I picked up my phone. I typed a message to Elliot, who was still sitting at the table in the next room. Packing up the documents. Message to Elliot Price. "The contract is signed. Execute the kill switch. But not yet. I want to check the collateral first. I want to know exactly which lie he told on page 4 regarding the bulldozers. I looked at the screen one last time. You didn't make a wise bet. Dad, I whispered to the ghost of his image. You just bet your life against the house. And I am the house. I turned to Glenn. Let's go home. I want to kiss Hazel goodnight, and then I want to start drafting the foreclosure notices. What about Miles? Glenn asked. He looked comfortable in that suit. He won't be for long, I said. He signed as a corporate officer attesting to the validity of the assets. When we prove the assets are phantom, he isn't just unemployed. He is personally liable for aiding and abetting. I opened the door to the media room and stepped out into the hallway. The lights of the city were bright, but for the first time in 7 years, the future didn't look like a dark tunnel. It looked like a courtroom, and I was ready to preside. The conference room air was recycled and dry, carrying the scent of warm electronics and expensive cologne. The negotiation phase was over. Now came the execution. Elliot Price reached into his briefcase and pulled out a binder. It was not a slender folder. It was a thick, heavy stack of paper bound in black plastic, the kind of document that makes a thud when it hits a mahogany table. He placed it directly in front of Harlan Whitethorn. The definitive credit agreement, Elliot said. His voice was devoid of emotion. This authorizes the liquidity rescue. It consolidates your existing obligations and releases the first tranche of operating capital. In exchange, we require a wet signature today. Harlan looked at the binder. He did not see the legal cages built into the paragraphs. He saw a life raft. He reached for the document, his hands betraying a slight tremor that he tried to mask by adjusting his cufflinks. He flipped the cover open, bypassing the table of contents, bypassing the definitions section. He was looking for one thing. He found it on page 3. Principal amount $4,200,000. Harlan smiled. It was a reflex, a twitch of the facial muscles that signaled relief. He saw the number and calculated the survival of his reputation. With $4 million, he could silence the suppliers. He could pay the back wages. He could keep the illusion alive for another year. Standard terms, Harlan said, though he had not read them. I assume the interest rate is what we discussed. The rate is fixed, Elliot replied. However, because this is a high-risk rescue facility, the security structure is specific. Please turn to page 40. Harlan wet his thumb and flipped the pages. The paper crinkled in the silence of the room. He landed on page 40. The header was in bold. Capitalized text, confession of judgment. Harlan froze. He was a businessman. He knew what a confession of judgment was. It was the legal equivalent of handing your enemy a loaded gun and kneeling down. It was a clause where the borrower voluntarily waives all rights to notice and a hearing. It allows the creditor to file a judgment against the debtor immediately upon default, without a trial, without a defense, and without the debtor even knowing until the sheriff shows up to padlock the doors. This is aggressive. Elliot, Harlan said, looking up. The smile was gone. I am effectively waiving my right to due process. In Illinois, this lets you freeze my accounts before I even get a phone call. It is a standard requirement for our distressed asset division, Elliot said smoothly. He did not blink. You are asking for $4 million to plug a hole in a sinking ship. My partners need to know that if you miss a payment, they do not have to spend 2 years in litigation to recover their principal. Harlan hesitated. He looked at the clause. He read the words irrevocably, authorizes any attorney to appear in any court of record and confess judgment. I can't sign this, Harlan said, pushing the binder away slightly. If I am one day late on a transfer because of a bank holiday, you could liquidate me. It is too much risk. Elliot checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe, understated and precise. It is 3:20 in the afternoon on a Friday. Harlan, Elliot said. The wire transfer window for international settlements closes at 4 o'clock sharp if we do not execute this document and initiate the wire in the next 40 minutes. The funds cannot be released until next Tuesday. Harlan flinched. Tuesday, he asked. Monday is a banking holiday. Elliot lied effortlessly. If you can wait until Tuesday, we can take the weekend to redraft the security agreement. We can remove the confession clause, but that will trigger a new underwriting review. That might take another week. Harlan's face went gray. I watched him from the dark media room, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. He could not wait until Tuesday. I knew that payroll for Ironhearth was due on Monday morning. I knew that he had already issued the checks. Counting on this money to cover them, if the wire did not hit his account by Monday morning, those checks would bounce. His employees would walk off the job. The union would file a grievance. The news would leak to the industry blogs. And I knew something else. I knew that the repo man for his Bentley was scheduled to visit his home on Saturday morning. The fear of public humiliation was a powerful solvent. It dissolved prudence. It dissolved logic. 40 minutes, Harlan muttered. He looked at Miles Harrow. Miles was sweating. He was looking at the binder like it was a bomb. But he was also looking at Harlan. Miles needed his salary. Miles needed the game to continue because he had no other skills than being Harlan's shadow. Harlan, Miles whispered, we need the payroll. Harlan looked at the watch on his own wrist. He looked at the door. He looked at the binder. The silence in the room stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. Fine, Harlan spat. But I want a side letter stating that you will provide a 5-day grace period for technical defaults. I cannot authorize a side letter without board approval, Elliot said, his hand hovering over the binder as if to take it back. We sign the standard deal, or we pause until next week. It is your choice. Harlan? Harlan stared at Elliot. He was used to bullying bankers. He was used to charming investors. But Elliot was a wall of polished granite. Harlan grabbed the pen. Give me the damn page, he said. He signed. The scratching sound of the pen on the paper was loud in the microphone feed. It was a harsh, jagged sound. Harlan J. Whitethorn. He signed the confession of judgment. He signed the personal guarantee. He signed the warranty of assets. Witness. Harlan barked at Miles. Miles Harrow leaned forward, eager to be useful, eager to prove his loyalty. He signed his name under Harlan's. Attesting that the signature was voluntary and authentic, they had done it. They had just signed their own execution orders. Harlan capped the pen and tossed it onto the table. He leaned back, exhaling a long breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. He thought he was safe. He thought the money was coming. There, Harlan said, regaining some of his bravado. You have your pound of flesh. Elliot, now, initiate the wire. My routing number is in the file. Elliot did not move to his laptop. He did not pick up his phone to call the bank. Instead, he reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a thin manila envelope. We will process the wire momentarily, Elliot said. But first, there is one final compliance check. Part of the agreement you just signed includes a warranty of assets. You certified, under penalty of perjury and immediate default, that the collateral listed in Schedule A is currently in your possession and free of other liens. Of course it is, Harlan said, impatient. The heavy machinery, the excavators at the Eden Prairie Yard, it is all there. Go look if you want. We did, Elliot said. He opened the envelope and slid 3 glossy 8x10 photographs across the table. Harlan looked at them. The first photo showed the Ironhearth equipment yard in Eden Prairie. It was taken yesterday. The yard was empty. There were tracks in the mud where heavy machines had been, but the machines were gone. The second photo showed a flatbed truck leaving the gate. On the back of the truck was a Caterpillar excavator with the Ironhearth logo on the side. The third photo was a close-up of a repossession order taped to the gate of the yard, bearing the letterhead of Midwest Heavy Leasing. These photos were taken 24 hours ago, Elliot said. It appears that Midwest Heavy Leasing exercised their right to repossess your fleet due to non-payment. The assets you just pledged to us, they are not yours. Harlan, they are gone. Harlan stared at the photos. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face flushed a deep, violent red. "That is a mistake," Harlan stammered. "They took them by mistake. I have my lawyers on it. It is a clerical error. I will have them back by Monday." "It does not matter if you get them back on Monday," Elliot said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. "You just signed a contract stating that you have them today. You represented to us that the collateral was secure. That is a material breach of the contract. It is fraud." "Now wait a minute," Miles interjected, standing up. "You can't call fraud on a technicality we can explain." "Sit down, Mr. Harrow," Elliot commanded. He did not shout, but the authority in his voice snapped Miles back into his chair. Elliot looked at Harlan. "Because of this material breach, the loan is in default, effectively immediately. You haven't even sent the money yet," Harlan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "How can I be in default if you haven't lent me the dime?" "We purchased your existing debt," Elliot corrected him. "We own the $4 million you already owed to North Star and the others. We agreed to restructure it based on this new collateral. Since the collateral is fake, the restructuring is void. The original debt is due, and thanks to the confession of judgment you signed 2 minutes ago." Elliot tapped the binder. "We do not have to sue you. We do not have to wait. We are accelerating the full balance, $4,200,000. Due now." Harlan looked around the room like a trapped animal. He looked at the door. He looked at Miles. He looked at the camera lens on the laptop. "This is a setup," Harlan hissed. "Who are you? Who is backing you? No fund moves this fast. You knew those machines were gone." "We did," Elliot admitted. "We do our homework." "You tricked me," Harlan accused. "You baited me into signing that confession. You signed it because you were greedy." "Harlan," Elliot said, "you signed it because you thought you could lie your way out of one more hole, but the dirt just ran out." Harlan stood up. "I am leaving. I am calling my attorney. I am canceling this signature." "You can't," Elliot said. "It is already witnessed, and the camera recorded it." "I don't care about your camera," Harlan yelled. He was losing control now. The polished CEO was gone, replaced by the cornered, angry man I remembered from the dinner table. "I am walking out of here, and if you try to enforce this, I will tie you up in court for 10 years. Do you know who I am? I am Harlan Whitethorn." "We know exactly who you are," a voice said. It was not Elliot's voice. I stood up in the media room. I smoothed the front of my black vest. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at Glenn. He nodded. "Go," he said. I opened the connecting door. The sound of the latch clicking was loud in the tense room. Harlan spun around to face the noise. Miles turned, his eyes wide. I stepped out of the shadows of the media room and into the bright fluorescent light of the conference suite. The air conditioning felt cold on my skin. Sharp and awakening, I walked to the end of the table. I did not look at Miles. I looked straight at Harlan. He stared at me. For a second. He did not recognize me. I was not the girl in the oversized sweater with snow on her boots. I was not the pregnant daughter crying for help. I was a woman in a bespoke suit, standing tall, holding a folder of my own. Then, recognition dawned. It started in his eyes a flicker of confusion, then shock, then horror. "Greer," he whispered. I placed my hands on the back of the empty chair at the head of the table. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Please, sit down. We have a lot of paperwork to get through." Harlan looked at me, and for a solid 10 seconds, the world inside that conference room stopped turning. It was fascinating to watch the human brain try to process a reality that it refused to accept. Harlan blinked. Once, twice, his mouth opened slightly, then closed. The color that had been rising in his cheeks drained away, leaving him looking waxy and old. He was trying to reconcile two images: the memory of the pregnant girl he had discarded in the snow 7 years ago, and the woman standing before him in a tailored suit, holding the deed to his destruction. He tried to smile. It was a grotesque effort. The corners of his mouth twitched upward, but his eyes remained dead, filled with a panic that was bordering on primal. Greer, he said again, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. You are Aurora. I am the Whitethorn Ledger Group, I said. My voice was calm, pitched low. I did not yell. I did not let my hands shake. I spoke with the flat, boring cadence of an actuary reading a mortality table. Aurora is just a holding vehicle. I am the principal. I am the one who bought your debt from North Star. I am the one who bought the paper from First Federal. And I am the one holding the confession of judgment you just signed. Harlan laughed. It was a wet, breathless sound. This is a joke, a prank. You were sleeping in your car. And you were robbing your company, I said. We all have our hobbies. I walked around the table and sat in the chair opposite him. I placed my folder on the mahogany surface, lining it up perfectly with the edge. Here is the situation. Harlan, you are in default. You breached the warranty of assets regarding the bulldozers. That accelerated the loan. The entire balance of $4,200,000 is due immediately. Since you signed the confession, we do not need to sue you. We have already won. I nodded to Elliot. Elliot typed a final command on his laptop. Filed, Elliot announced, his British accent cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The judgment has been electronically lodged with the Cook County Clerk. The writ of execution is being transmitted to the sheriff's office as we speak. I have also sent a freeze order to your primary operating accounts at Chase and Wells Fargo. Harlan flinched as if he had been slapped. You froze the payroll account. We froze everything, Elliot said. By the time you get to the elevator, your corporate cards will be declined. By the time you get to your car, the toll transponder might not even work. Harlan stared at me. The shock was fading, replaced by the manipulative instinct that had kept him alive for 30 years. He leaned forward, softening his posture. He clasped his hands together, trying to summon the aura of the benevolent patriarch. Greer, honey, he said. The endearment made my stomach turn, but I kept my face blank. Listen to me. I know you are angry. I know I was hard on you back then. But you have to understand. I was under pressure. The market was crashing. I did what I had to do to save the family. You kicked me out, I said. You stole my identity. You ruined my credit score so I couldn't rent a home for your grandchild. I was protecting you, Harlan insisted, his voice rising with fake passion. I wanted you to be tough. I wanted you to learn resilience. And look at you. You are a success. You are a shark. I made you this way. I am proud of you. Stop, I said. It was a single, sharp command. Do not try to rewrite history. Harlan, you didn't do it to teach me a lesson. You did it because you needed a guarantor who wouldn't ask questions. You used my name as a shield to protect yourself from the banks. You protected your lifestyle, not your family. I am your father, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You are a debtor, I corrected him. And I am a creditor. That is the only relationship we have left. Miles Harrow cleared his throat. I had almost forgotten he was there. Miles had been sitting in stunned silence, staring at me with wide eyes. But now, seeing Harlan failing, he decided to step in. He adjusted his tie, trying to look important, trying to look like the chief operating officer he pretended to be. Greer, Miles said. His voice was smooth. That same oily charm that had tricked me when I was 19. Let's all calm down. This is business, right? We can work this out. You don't want to destroy Ironhearth. It is your legacy too. I turned my gaze to him. You don't get to speak to me, Miles. Come on, Greer, Miles said, leaning back in his chair, a smirk touching his lips. I know you. I know you are hurt. I know you are still mad that I didn't stick around. But we were kids. We made mistakes. Don't take it out on the company. Don't use your dad to get back at me. You think this is about you? I asked, genuinely amused. Miles, you are a rounding error in this equation. You are an accessory. I am the father of your child, he said. The room went dead silent. Harlan looked at Miles, then at me. That is right, Miles continued, gaining confidence from my silence. I know about Hazel. I did the math. She is 7. Right, cute kid. I bet she looks like me. She looks like herself, I said coldly. Miles reached into his leather folio. See, the thing is, Greer, we did our homework too. Harlan told me you might be unstable. He told me you might come back looking for trouble. So we prepared a little insurance policy of our own. He slid a document across the table. It was not a financial report. It was a legal motion, stamped with the seal of the family court. Petition for temporary guardianship. Petitioners, Harlan Whitethorn and Miles Harrow. I looked at the document. I felt the blood drain from my face. I felt a coldness in my chest that was absolute zero. What is this? I whispered. It is a petition for emergency custody, Miles said, his voice dripping with false concern. See, we have reason to believe that Hazel is being raised in an unstable environment. You have no fixed address history for the first 2 years of her life. You have a history of financial delinquency which, thanks to your credit report, is a matter of public record. You work in the high-stress, predatory industry of debt collection. You are out of your mind, I said. We have witnesses, Harlan chimed in, seeing an opening. I have neighbors from Eden Prairie who will testify you were erratic before you left. I have statements saying you ran away, and Miles is the biological father. He has rights. If he files for custody claiming you are unfit, the court will have to investigate. Social services will come to your house. They will interview Hazel. They will drag this out for months. And while the investigation is pending, Miles added, tapping the paper, we can ask for a freeze on your ability to leave the state. We can make your life a living hell. Greer, just like you're trying to do to us. It was a beautiful, evil move. It was exactly the kind of thing Harlan would cook up. He knew he couldn't beat me on the numbers, so he attacked the one thing I valued more than money. He attacked my daughter. Harlan leaned back, crossing his arms. So here's the deal. You release the judgment. You unfreeze the accounts. You sign the company back over to me for a token sum. We walk away, and in exchange, Miles drops the petition. We never speak to Hazel. You keep your daughter. I keep my company. A life for a life. I looked at the petition. I saw the name of the attorney listed at the bottom. Brant Weller, Esquire. I stared at the name. A slow, burning rage started to rise in me. But I pushed it down. I converted it into fuel. You are blackmailing me, I said quietly, with my own daughter. I am negotiating, Harlan said. Leverage is leverage. Greer, you taught me that today. I looked at Elliot. Elliot was checking something on his phone. He looked up at me and gave a microscopic nod. I turned back to Harlan. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I just smiled. It was a terrifying smile. I knew, because Miles stopped smirking. That is a very strong play, I said. Brant Weller is a good lawyer, expensive, aggressive. He does all your dirty work, doesn't he? Brant is the best in the city. Harlan bragged. He has never lost a custody case. I know, I said. I researched him very thoroughly. I turned to Elliot. Elliot, do you have the file on Mr. Weller? I do, Elliot said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. What is this? Harlan asked, his brow furrowing. You see, Dad, I said, leaning forward, when you told me to look at the whole picture, I took that advice to heart. I didn't just look at Ironhearth. I looked at your entire ecosystem. I looked at your suppliers, your contractors, and your lawyers. I opened the blue folder. Brant Weller. I read. Senior partner at Weller Associates. He has a nice office on Michigan Avenue. Very prestigious. But prestige is expensive. Did you know Brant went through a messy divorce 3 years ago? Cost him half his liquidity. So what? Harlan snapped. Brant's personal life is none of your business. It became my business when he took out a high-interest operating loan to cover his firm's tax liability, I said. $750,000. He borrowed it from a private lending group called Apex Capital. Harlan went still. Apex Capital was looking to liquidate some of their riskier portfolios last month. I continued. They were nervous about the legal sector downturn, so they put a bundle of law firm debts up for sale. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a notice of assignment. Borrower Brant Weller / Weller Associates. New creditor Whitethorn Ledger Group. I bought his debt. Harlan, I said softly. I own your lawyer. Harlan stared at the paper. Miles looked like he was about to be sick. I own the note on his office furniture, I said. I own the lien on his accounts receivable. And do you know what the covenants of his loan say? They say that if he engages in any unethical or frivolous litigation that could jeopardize his ability to repay, I can call the loan immediately. I pointed to the custody petition. This, I said, pointing to the document Miles had tried to use as a weapon, is frivolous litigation. It is based on perjury. You know I am not unstable. You know Miles abandoned us. If Brant Weller files this document in court, he is knowingly submitting a false statement to a tribunal. That is an ethical violation. I leaned in closer. So here is what is going to happen. In about 5 minutes, Elliot is going to call Brant Weller. He is going to inform Mr. Weller that his primary creditor, me, has reviewed the draft petition he prepared for you. He is going to remind Mr. Weller that if he files this paper, or if he represents you in any capacity against me, I will consider it a breach of his loan covenants. I will foreclose on his law firm by tomorrow morning. I will take his desk. I will take his client list. I will ruin him. Harlan's mouth worked silently. He looked at the custody petition, his golden ticket, and watched it turn into ash. You can't do that, Miles stammered. That is interference. That is the free market, I said. I am protecting my investment. I cannot have my debtor wasting his time and resources on lies. I stood up and walked over to where Miles was sitting. I picked up the custody petition. I tore it in half. Then I tore it again. I dropped the pieces onto the table in front of him. You don't have a lawyer anymore. Harlan, I said. Brant isn't going to take your call. In fact, nobody in this town is going to take your call once they find out I am buying up the debt of anyone who helps you. Harlan slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him all at once. He looked small. He looked defeated. What do you want? Harlan whispered. I told you, I said, sitting back down. I want everything. But let's start with the truth. Miles, give me your phone. What? Miles clutched his pocket. Your phone, I repeated. Elliot, tell him the penalty for corporate officers who conceal evidence during a forensic audit. 5 years in federal prison, Elliot recited. Plus restitution. Miles took his phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He slid it across the table to me. Unlock it, I commanded. He punched in the code. Go to your messages with Harlan, I said. Scroll back to the day the bulldozers were moved. Miles did it. He pushed the phone back to me. I looked at the screen. There it was. Harlan, and get the equipment out of the yard before the bank inspector comes. Move it to the secondary site. We will tell them it is out on a job. Miles on it. Should I doctor the logs? Harlan, yes. Make it look like a rental. I looked up at them. This is conspiracy to commit bank fraud. This is wire fraud. And now, I have the evidence on a device you voluntarily provided. I looked at Harlan. He was staring at the table, defeated. Now, I said, about that custody petition, Miles, you are going to write a statement, right now. You are going to write that you have had no contact with Hazel for 7 years, that you have provided no support, and that you waive all parental rights because you are unfit, and you are going to cite your involvement in this fraud as the reason. I can't put that in writing, Miles cried. That is a confession. You already signed a confession today. Miles, I reminded him, pointing to the financial agreement. This is just the addendum. You sign it. And I might let you stay out of prison. You refuse. And I send this text thread to the FBI before dinner. Miles grabbed a notepad. He started writing. He didn't look at Harlan. He didn't look at me. He just wrote, terrified. Harlan watched him, betrayal written all over his face. "You coward," Harlan muttered. "He learned from the best." "Dad," I said. I turned to Elliot. "Call Brant Weller. Tell him his debt is safe for now. As long as he drops these two as clients immediately, and tell him to send over his entire file on Harlan Whitethorn. I want to see every email, every draft, every secret they shared. Attorney-client privilege doesn't apply when the services were used to commit a crime." "Understood," Elliot said. Dialing his phone, I sat back and watched my father. He was alone. His lawyer was mine. His partner was turning on him. His money was frozen. "You said I was a liability," I said to him. Harlan looked up, his eyes wet. "I am not a liability, Dad," I said. "I am the audit, and I found a discrepancy." The speakerphone on the mahogany table crackled. Cutting through the heavy silence of the conference room, it was the voice of a man who realized he was standing on a trap door that had just been unlatched. "Ms. Whitethorn," Brant Weller's voice came through, thin and reedy. "I want to clarify that I was unaware of the conflict of interest regarding my firm's debt obligations. Had I known that Whitethorn Ledger Group held my operating notes, I would never have taken this case." "You know now, Brant," I said, leaning toward the device. "And you also know the covenants of your loan. Clause 14. Any engagement in litigation that is deemed malicious or based on falsified evidence constitutes a default event. I can seize your firm's assets by tomorrow morning." "I am withdrawing," Brant said quickly. "I am sending a notice of withdrawal to the court right now. I am dropping Harlan and Miles as clients effective immediately. I want no part of this." Harlan looked at the phone, his face twisting in betrayal. "Brant, you can't dump me. We have a retainer." "Your retainer is gone." "Harlan," Brant snapped. "And frankly, so is my patience. You didn't tell me your daughter was the one holding the leash." "Not so fast." "Brant," I interrupted, "you don't get to just walk away and pretend this didn't happen. You filed a draft petition accusing me of being unstable. You put that into the legal ether." "I will withdraw it," Brant promised. "It will be like it never existed." "No," I said. "Silence doesn't fix a smear. If you withdraw quietly, people will just think you settled. They will think there was merit to the accusation. I want a retraction. I want you to file a sworn affidavit stating that the petition was based on insufficient and erroneous data provided by your clients. I want it on the record that they lied, not that you made a mistake." "Greer," Brant hesitated, that exposes me to a malpractice suit from them. "And not doing it exposes you to foreclosure from me," I said calmly. "Choose your executioner. Brant, only one of us can take your house." There was a long pause. I could hear Brant breathing on the other end. "Fine," Brant whispered. "I will draft the affidavit, but I need them to admit the data was false. I can't just say it. I need proof." I looked at Glenn. He was standing by the window, scrolling through the digital files Brant had frantically emailed over just minutes ago, the evidence file they had planned to use against me. Glenn looked up, his eyes sharp. "Greer, look at this." He turned the iPad toward me. On the screen was the background report Brant had used to justify the custody petition. It listed me as financially irresponsible and prone to high-risk borrowing. "Look at the source citations," Glenn said. I looked closer. The report cited 3 specific charge-offs: a credit card from 2019, a heavy equipment lease from 2020, and a personal loan from 2021. I felt a cold laugh bubble up in my chest. It was absurd. It was almost poetic in its cruelty. "Harlan," I said, turning to my father, "this is rich, even for you." "What?" Harlan grunted, still reeling from the loss of his lawyer. "Your argument that I am an unfit mother is based on my bad credit history," I said, tapping the screen. "But these bad debts, These are the exact same loans you took out in my name. You stole my identity, ruined my credit, and then gave that ruined credit report to your lawyer as proof that I am unstable." Harlan shrugged, a gesture of maddening indifference. "The record is the record. Greer, the court looks at the numbers. They don't look at the backstory." "But we do," Glenn said. "And now, we are going to make the record match the truth." I saw the path. It was a narrow opening, but it was enough. "Elliot," I said, "draft a new document. Call it a stipulation of facts regarding financial history." I turned to Harlan. "Here is the deal. You are staring at a $4 million judgment. I can take your house, your cars, and your company today. But I am a generous creditor. I am willing to offer you a forbearance. I will pause the seizure of your personal assets, the house and the car, for 90 days. Harlan's eyes lit up. 90 days was a lifetime to a con artist. He was already calculating how he could hide money in that time. "What is the catch?" Harlan asked. "The catch is that you sign this stipulation," I said. "I need to clean up my credit report. To do that, I need the original creditor, that is you, the person who actually spent the money, to admit that those accounts were corporate debts, not personal ones. You need to sign a statement acknowledging that you opened those accounts using my name for Ironhearth's benefit, and that I had no knowledge of them." Harlan narrowed his eyes. "That sounds like a confession to identity theft." "No," I lied smoothly. "It is just a debt recharacterization. We frame it as an authorized user error. You say you thought you had permission. It frames it as a misunderstanding, not a crime. It gets the debt off my name and puts it onto the company's books. Since I own the company's debt anyway, it doesn't change what you owe me. It just cleans up the paperwork." Harlan looked at Miles. Miles looked useless. "It gets the debt off her personal file," Harlan asked. "So the custody petition becomes moot." "Exactly," I said. "You admit it was a clerical mix-up. The custody case dies a natural death. I get my clean name. You get 90 days to try and save your house. Everyone wins. It was a bait designed perfectly for him. He thought he was trading a useless piece of paper, my reputation, for a tangible asset, his house. He didn't care about my name. He only cared about his property." "And Brant?" Harlan asked. "Brant will notarize it," I said. "Brant, are you listening? You will witness Mr. Whitethorn signing a statement admitting that the evidence you used for the petition was derived from corporate debts he generated." "I will witness it," Brant said over the phone. Sounding relieved to have a legal off-ramp, Elliot finished typing and sent the document to the printer in the corner of the room. The machine whirred. I slid the paper to Harlan. He read it. It was dry, boring legal language. "The undersigned acknowledges that Account X and Account Y were utilized for Ironhearth operations. The naming convention was an administrative proxy. It looked harmless, but legally, it was a death blow. By signing it, he was creating a sworn affidavit that linked him directly to the fraudulent accounts. He was admitting the act. He might think administrative proxy sounded safe, but to a prosecutor, it meant fraud, and because Brant was witnessing it as an officer of the court. Harlan couldn't claim later that he was coerced or didn't understand. He was signing it with his own counsel present. 90 days, Harlan verified. 90 days of no personal foreclosure. I promised. He picked up the pen. He signed. I watched the ink dry. Harlan J. Whitethorn. "Done," he said, pushing it back. "Now, call off the dogs." I handed the document to Elliot. "File this with the credit bureaus immediately. And Elliot, send a copy to the district attorney's office. Attached to the original fraud complaint we drafted this morning." Harlan froze. "What?" "I said I wouldn't foreclose on your house for 90 days, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't say I wouldn't report a felony. You just signed a sworn statement admitting that you used my identity to secure funds for your company. That is bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft, and you just gave me the confession in writing. Witnessed by your own lawyer." Harlan stood up, his chair crashing backward. You lied. You said it was a recharacterization. I said what I needed to say to get the truth, I replied. Welcome to the negotiation table. Dad, Miles Harrow stood up then. His face was red, his fists clenched. He realized the ship was going down, and he was not going to drown quietly. You think you are so smart, Miles spat. You think you can just destroy us. You forget who I am. Greer, I know things. You know nothing, Miles, I said, not even looking at him. I know about your time in the shelter. Miles sneered. I know about the depression. I have photos. Greer, old photos, from when we were together. Things you wouldn't want your fancy business partners to see. If you don't cut me a deal, if you don't give me a severance package and walk away, I will leak them. I will put them on every blog in Chicago. I will paint you as a slut and a junkie who abandoned her family. The room went very quiet. Glenn stepped forward, his face dark, but I held up a hand to stop him. That is a very ugly threat, Miles, I said. But blackmail requires leverage, and you don't have any. I reached into my bag and pulled out a different file. It was thinner, bound in a red folder. You threatened to expose my private life, I said. So let's talk about your professional life. Did you know that Ironhearth's email server is backed up to a cloud service? And did you know that when I bought the company's debt, I also acquired the rights to audit its digital infrastructure for asset verification? Miles went pale. I have been reading your emails for 3 weeks. Miles, I said. I found a very interesting folder labeled Consulting. It seems you have been running a side business. You have been approving vendor contracts for Ironhearth at 20% above market rate, and those vendors have been kicking back 5% to a PayPal account registered in your name. I opened the folder and tossed a stack of printouts onto the table. They were transaction logs. That is embezzlement, I said. You were stealing from Harlan while he was stealing from the banks. You two really deserve each other. Harlan looked at Miles with pure hatred. You were skimming from me. I had to live, Miles stammered. You weren't paying me enough. I have the PayPal receipts, I told Miles. I have the vendor emails, and I have the confirmation numbers. If you release one photo of me, if you whisper my name to a single reporter, I will hand this file to the police. Embezzlement over $10,000 is a felony. This is over $200,000. Miles collapsed back into his chair. He looked like a deflated balloon. The arrogance was gone. The threat was gone. He was just a petty thief caught in the spotlight. Sit there and be quiet, I commanded. I looked at the two of them. My father, the fraud, my ex-lover, the thief. They looked small. They looked pathetic. Elliot, I said, finalize the paperwork. I want the transfer of control for Ironhearth, signed by 5 o'clock. Harlan, you are resigning as CEO, Miles. You are fired for cause. You will both sign non-disclosure agreements. If you talk, you go to jail. If you fight, you go to jail. If you breathe wrong, I call the loan. Harlan looked at the pen in his hand. He looked at the room he used to command. You took everything, he whispered. I took back what was mine, I said. Plus interest. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message. The number was unfamiliar. I picked it up, expecting a confirmation from the bank or a message from the nanny, but it wasn't. Sender unknown. Ms. Whitethorn, I am the former site foreman for Ironhearth. I heard you are cleaning house. There is something you need to see. It is not just the debt, and it is not just the skimming. A second message appeared, an image. It was a photo of a ledger, handwritten. Sender. Unknown. Harlan didn't just borrow money to keep the projects going. He paid off the inspectors, the structural permits for the Eden Prairie Mall extension. They were bought. The concrete isn't up to code. If that building opens next month, people will die. I stared at the screen. My blood ran cold. I had thought this was a financial crime. I thought I was dealing with thieves. But this was something else. This was physical danger. This was corruption that could bury people in rubble. I looked up at Harlan. He was staring at the table, defeated, thinking he had lost his money. He didn't know yet that he was about to lose his freedom for something much darker. "Is there a problem?" Glenn asked, noticing my expression. "We need to stop the meeting," I said, standing up abruptly. "Elliot, get the signatures. Now. But don't release the forbearance. Not yet." "Why?" Harlan asked, sensing the shift in the air. "Because," I said, clutching the phone tight, "I think I just found out why you were really so desperate to keep everyone away from the company records." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man standing on a foundation that was about to collapse, and he had no idea I was the one holding the detonator. "The audit isn't over, Dad," I said. "It is just beginning." The final showdown did not happen in the dark. I wanted the lights on. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the end of Harlan Whitethorn to be a matter of public record. I arranged for the meeting to be held in the main boardroom of the Aon Center, a space vast enough to hold the wreckage of my father's empire. I invited everyone. I invited the representatives from North Star Community Bank. I invited the chief financial officer of his largest material supplier, a man who had been unpaid for 6 months, and of course, I required the presence of Brant Weller, not as Harlan's defender, but as the legal recorder of the proceedings. When Harlan walked in, he stopped short. He had expected another intimate, high-pressure squeeze in a small room. Instead, he found a tribunal. He wore a fresh suit, likely pressed by a dry cleaner he owed money to. He adjusted his tie, lifting his chin in that reflexive gesture of arrogance that had survived 7 years of failure. He still believed he could talk his way out of this. He looked at the bankers, offering them a tight nod, as if they were all partners in a rough patch rather than victims of his theft. "Quite a turnout," Harlan said, taking the seat at the opposite end of the long granite table. He looked at me. I assumed we were finalizing the forbearance agreement. "Greer, I didn't know we needed an audience. We are not here for forbearance. Harlan," I said. My voice was amplified by the room's acoustics, calm and absolute. "We are here for liquidation." "Liquidation." Harlan laughed, a nervous, barking sound. "We have a deal. You said 90 days. I signed your paper." "You signed a stipulation regarding the identity theft," I corrected him. "That solved my problem, but it didn't solve theirs." I gestured to the creditors lining the wall. "And it certainly didn't solve the problem of what I found on your phone 5 minutes ago." Harlan's eyes darted to Miles Harrow. Miles was sitting next to him, looking like a man who was trying to shrink until he disappeared. "I don't know what you are talking about," Harlan said. "Ironhearth is solvent. We have the mall contract. The Eden Prairie Mall extension," I said. "The project that is supposed to save you." I picked up a document from my stack. It was not a bank statement. It was a printout of the ledger image the foreman had sent me, alongside a timeline of legal fees paid to Brant Weller's firm. "I have been looking at your cash flow." "Harlan," I said. "Specifically, the money you pulled out of the company accounts 3 months ago. The money you claimed was for legal consulting fees paid to Weller Associates." I turned to Brant Weller. The lawyer was sitting stiffly, his face pale. He knew I owned his debt. He knew he was one wrong answer away from losing his practice. "Brant," I said, "did you receive $50,000 from Ironhearth on the 14th of November?" Brant cleared his throat. The firm received a payment, yes." "And what was that payment for?" I asked, because according to the court records, there were no active cases that month, no filings, no depositions. "It was for general advisory services," Brant stammered. "No, it wasn't," I said, because on the 15th of November, the very next day, a cash withdrawal of $45,000 was made from your firm's operating account, and on the 16th of November, the structural permit for the Eden Prairie Mall, which had been stalled for weeks due to safety violations, was suddenly approved by the county inspector. The room went deadly silent. The bankers shifted in their seats. This was no longer just about bad debt. This was bribery. Harlan slammed his hand on the table. This is wild speculation. You are accusing me of bribing an official. You have no proof. I have the email chain. I lied. It was a bluff, but a calculated one based on the foreman's intel. And I have your lawyer. I looked at Brandt. Brandt, look at me. I own your loan. If you facilitated a bribe through your client trust account, you are not just bankrupt. You are disbarred. You are going to prison, unless you want to tell the room who authorized those transactions. Brandt looked at Harlan. Then he looked at the terrified faces of the bankers. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. It was Harlan, Brandt said, his voice trembling. He told me he needed to move cash to a consultant to expedite the permits. He instructed me to bill it as legal fees and withdraw the cash. I have his signed authorization in my files. You traitor! Harlan screamed, lunging halfway out of his chair. I paid you to protect me. You paid him with stolen money, I said, my voice cutting through his rage. And speaking of stolen money, that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. I slid the last document across the table. It was the internal email chain from 7 years ago, the one the foreman had preserved. The subject line was Credit Line Establishment /G. Whitethorn. I always wondered why you kicked me out, I said quietly. I thought it was shame. I thought you hated that I was pregnant, but that was just a convenient excuse, wasn't it? Harlan stared at the email. He didn't speak. You needed capital, I continued. You were already paying bribes back then. You needed a fresh credit line to launder the money for the inspector on the highway project. You couldn't use your name. You couldn't use the company's name, so you used mine. I looked at the bankers. He opened credit cards and equipment leases in my name. He cashed them out. He used that money to pay off the inspectors. And then he kicked me out of the house so I wouldn't be around to see the statements arrive in the mail. He didn't exile me because I was a moral failure. He exiled me because I was a witness. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The liability he had branded me with was actually his own crime. You monster, Miles whispered, staring at Harlan. Even Miles, the thief, was shocked by the scale of it. Harlan stood up. He was shaking. His face was a mask of fury and ruin. You are destroying this family, Harlan shouted. His voice cracked, echoing off the glass walls. I did what I had to do. I built this company. I put food on the table. And you come in here, after 7 years, and burn it all down. I am your father. You owe me. I stood up slowly. I did not shout. I did not cry. I felt a cold, heavy peace settle in my chest. Family is not where you use your daughter's name as collateral, I said. The sentence hung in the air. It was the verdict he could not appeal. And I don't owe you anything, I added. But you owe me. You owe me 7 years. You owe me the nights I slept in a car. You owe me the dignity of my own name. I signaled to Elliot. He placed a final document in front of Harlan. This is a confession of criminal fraud, I said. It details the identity theft, the falsified loan applications, and the bribery payments. It clears my credit history completely. It clears the name of the company so the creditors can recover what is left of the assets without being tied to your crimes. I won't sign that, Harlan snarled. That is a prison sentence. If you don't sign it, I said, I hand the foreman's evidence to the FBI immediately. They will come for you tonight. They will arrest you in front of the neighbors. They will take everything. Your legacy will be 0. I leaned forward. But if you sign it, I will allow an orderly liquidation. I will let you surrender the assets voluntarily. I will give you 24 hours to vacate your house before the seizure. You will still go to prison. Harlan, but you will go on your own feet, not in cuffs on the 6 o'clock news. It is the only dignity you have left to buy. Harlan looked around the room. He looked at the bankers, who refused to meet his eyes. He looked at Brandt, who was busy taking notes to save his own skin. He looked at Miles, who was already texting his own lawyer. He was alone. The myth of Harlan Whitethorn was dead. He picked up the pen. His hand was heavy, as if the weight of every lie he had ever told was pulling it down. He signed. He didn't look at me. He just signed his name one last time, surrendering the lie he had lived for a decade. "Get out," I said. Harlan stood up. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He walked to the door, his steps shuffling and uneven. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I turned to the bankers. "Gentlemen," I said, "the assets are yours. Elliot will handle the distribution. Ironhearth is closed." I walked out of the Aon Center and into the cool evening air of Chicago. The city sounded different. The sirens, the traffic, the wind off the lake. It wasn't noise anymore. It was just life. I took a cab to the suburbs. I walked up the driveway of our small townhouse. The lights were on. I could see Glenn's silhouette in the window, holding Hazel. I opened the door. The smell of dinner, roasted chicken and sage wrapped around me. "Greer," Glenn called out from the kitchen. I walked in. Hazel was sitting at the table, coloring in a book. She looked up, her face bright and uncomplicated. "Mommy," she yelled. I picked her up. She felt solid. She felt real. "Did you finish your work?" Glenn asked, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at my face, searching for the toll the day had taken. "I finished it," I said. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. I logged into the credit monitoring service. I refreshed the page. The red flags were gone. The derogatory marks were gone. The Ironhearth accounts were listed as disputed, removed by creditor. My score was ticking up. 600, 700. I looked at the name at the top of the screen. Greer Whitethorn. It wasn't a liability anymore. It wasn't a debt. It was just a name. My name. I closed the laptop and looked at my husband and my daughter. "I am home," I said, and for the first time in 7 years, I knew I could afford to stay. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country, so we can see how far Greer's story has traveled. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help us share these stories with more people. Your support means the world to us.